Hi everybody, and welcome back to the Shoemaker Report. In the past couple sessions, we spent a lot of time exploring what was going on in the very beginning when Hashem created Adam Rishon with this incredible soul, and then he clothed that soul with levels and levels of special clothing, which were literally light. And that's what he was. He was a soul clothed with clothings of light, an awesome being, which is really impossible for us to totally comprehend. But then he was placed into Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, and he was put in a situation where he was going to be tested, and he failed the test. We all know. And what happened after that? It says that Hashem made for him garments of ore, meaning garments with an ayin, in other words, leather. Hashem put on him, instead of ore, with an aleph, meaning he was originally clothed with light. Eventually, because of his sin, he ended up being clothed, chas v'shalom, but with this stuff here, with the physical goof, flesh and blood, and covered finally with this layer called skin or ore. And so we learned that that's what the Kabbalistic sources call the mishka dechivya, which means the skin of the serpent, and that's what we have. That's what we have. We talked a lot about in the past about how we're supposed to be very careful about that. We should be very much ashamed of that. We should want to cover it up, and so on and so forth. But this morning I'd like to explore a different angle of that, which is the following. We oftentimes talk about the yetzer hara, right? The evil inclination. Now, Chazal tell us, they teach us that in the very beginning, the yetzer hara was something external to man. But as a result of the sin, what happened? We were told that the yetzer hara became internal to him. So what does it mean? Well, it's a very nice poetic way of saying what we've been talking about over the past two sessions. What am I talking about? Meaning that the yetzer hara was external in the sense that it wasn't part of Adam's clothing. It was, yes, there was the evil force, the Satan, and all of his army, and so on. But it wasn't part of us. It was external. But when mankind sinned, when Adam Rishon sinned, which is all of mankind, we were all part of that terrible sin in the very beginning. What happened? So we lost that light, as we said. We got clothed with this thing. And this thing that we call the physical body, the physical goof, is the clothing that we acquired as a result. We talked about that before, of being swallowed up by the snake. So we're literally inside of snake skin. That's the yetzer hara. This physical body is literally the source of our yetzer hara. And you could sort of break down the yetzer hara into like 5 major components, that each of them correspond to one of the main 5 senses of the goof. We have a yetzer hara associated with our eyes. We have one associated with our ears. We have one associated with our mouth. We have one associated with our sense of touch. And there's probably one other one. I can't just count the 5. But anyway, you can count the 5 and you know exactly what they are. But that's where the yetzer hara is. The yetzer hara is literally embedded in our 5 physical senses. That's where they are. And another way to look at it is that, and there's really no escaping that. Now, wherever there's the yetzer hara, there's also the yetzer tov. Another way of saying that is wherever there's the malchut of tuma, right? There is also equivalent to it the proper malchut, the malchut of kedusha. Another way of saying that is wherever you see the samach man and all of his evil forces, for example, Lily, his quote spouse, you also see the corresponding side on kedusha, which means you see HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is in a sense the anpin, and then you also have the Shechina, which is malchut, his quote wife. So you see that we have this pairing. Wherever we have kedusha, you have tuma, and vice versa. And so, yes, it's true to say that the yetzer hara is embedded in our senses, but that means that that's where the battle takes place. That's literally where the battle takes place. The battle takes place in each and every one of us, in our eyes, in our ears, in our mouth, in our sense of touch, and so on. So let's explain a little bit. Let's start with something very easy to understand, our eyes. There is literally yetzer hara embedded in our eyes, but there's also kedusha, or potential kedusha, also embedded in our eyes. That's the battle. We can choose to either use our eyes for kedusha, for holiness, for goodness, Or we can choose, chas v'shalom, to use our eyes to increase tumah, not only in ourselves, but in the world as a whole. So we have laws that we all know about. For example, you're not supposed to look at certain things in this world. You're not supposed to look at foreign women. You're not supposed to look at girls that are not part of your family. You're not just even like stam, let alone. And this is basic halacha. I'm not giving you something that's like Breslovish. This is basic halacha. You can look this stuff up in the Shulchan Aruch. On the other hand, so when we do, what happens? When we do, we create tumah in our mind, because you see the eyes are not very far from the brain. There's a very short little optic nerves connects the eye to the brain. In a sense, you can think that the eye, in fact, all the facial senses, are really just extensions of the brain. That's really what they are. We think of them as being something separate that's connected to the brain. But really, the other way to look at it is that they are literally part of the brain that's just poking out of the main part of the brain. That's really what they are. So our eyes are really part of our brain. And our ears inside there is really part of our brain. And our sense of smell is part of our brain. And so on. So when we take in through the eyes, literally through the interface of the brain that interacts with this physical world, and we're literally putting images into our brain that we're not supposed to be putting in there, we're creating tumah in our mind, in our soul. We're damaging our very essence. This is very problematic, obviously. On a much more deeper level, what happens, when we do such a thing, we're creating what's called andromusia. This is brought out in some of the more, let's call them holy works that are not so well known. One of them being the Megala Amukos talks about this and explains it in fair amount of detail. That what does it really mean? It's brought also down in Gemara, but it's left a little bit unexplained. What's really happening is when we look at forbidden sights, we're literally bringing together, we're creating yichud in the upper worlds between the forces of Tumah, meaning between the Satan, the Samak Mem, and his consort, Lily. We're creating yichud there. And when we do that, they create all kinds of damaging shadim and other kinds of spirits that are all, more than happy to wreak damage in the world. Well, that's really what's happening on a spiritual level. We wonder, why is the world in such bad shape? It's great in part because we're looking at things that we shouldn't be looking at, and that has consequences. So we can use our eyes for good. What does that mean? Well, we can embed our eyes into a Gemara. We can read Holy Sfarim. That's using our eyes for good. That's what our eyes were created for. Our eyes were created in order to be able to read Torah. But, chas v'shalom, we go explore and look around, and we use our eyes for things that we shouldn't be using. And it's not what they were originally intended for. That's the yetzer embedded in our eye. It's literally in our senses. That's what Chazal means when they said that one time before the sin of Adam Rishon, the yetzer was external, and then it became internal. Yeah, actually, it's internal. It's literally, we're walking around with it, and there's no escaping it. Not until we're able to extract our soul. We talked about a little bit last time. Extract our soul from the physical goof, or another way to put it is that the physical goof would literally be retransformed back into its spiritual counterpart, which is the goof of light. And then from that, we don't have to die, kilu. We could go straight into Gan Eden with our goof. Not this goof, but a goof of light. So that's the choice. And that also, everything is choice. Everything is Bechirah. I'll give you another example. Let's take our ears. How is the yetzer embedded in our, how is the Satan literally embedded in our ears, in the sense of hearing? Well, we can use, on the good side, on the side of Kedusha, we can use our ears to hear words of Torah. Like if you're listening to this, hopefully it's something good. And then you're listening to it, and your ears are being used for good. That's what your ears were made for. Your ears were made to hear words of Torah, good words of song, words of praise. On the other hand, we could use our ears instead, chas v'shalom, we would, but we see the world around us. We could listen to Tumah, meaning what? For example, we could listen to all kinds of music that's completely inappropriate. Forget about the lyrics, let alone the actual essence of the music itself. That's using our ears for the sake of Tumah. That's literally the Samach Mem embedded in our ears. We could also, for example, listen to Lashon Hara, chas v'shalom, or some other form of forbidden speech. And then and worse, not just hear it, but believe it, or at least maybe incline, and maybe it's quite possible. And then again, we're using our ears for something that's completely usher, completely forbidden to use our ears for those purposes. That's another example. Then there's, say, the mouth. That should be obvious. But again, we can either use our mouth for good, which is to speak out words of Torah, to speak out words of encouragement, to speak out words of thanksgiving, to speak kind words, helpful words. Or, chas v'shalom, we would be tempted to use our word and then execute what we're tempted in, to use our mouth, our words, to shoot out arrows that wound people, which we typically call lashon hara, but motzi shem ra and all the other kinds of forbidden speech that we're not allowed to do. But you see, there's an appetite, there's a taiva. Especially when we don't like somebody, let's say chas v'shalom, we don't like somebody, and you notice that and then you see somebody, or you heard about somebody doing something that you think is wrong, and then there's this taiva, there's this lust that comes up, and you just want to say something against that person, and you justify yourself, myself, this is the way I speak, but all of us, we justify ourselves. How? We say, well, it's true. We're just telling the truth. And after all, Hosea, don't you always talk about how important it is to talk about the truth? Yes, I do. But you see, there's some aspects of truth which are forbidden to speak. And when the truth is a negative thing against somebody that's going to harm them, is going to damage them, you have to ask yourself the question, who benefits? Who benefits? Do they benefit or do you benefit? If I speak lashon hara against somebody, chas v'shalom, am I benefiting? Yeah, you're going to feel good. But in the end, I'm not going to benefit. But they're certainly not benefiting. So, I spoke the truth. See, it's just self-justification. Each of these topics is just giving like a little, right? We're just going across the chapter headings, Kilo. Just to help you to see the point. And the point I'm trying to make is that we live in a world where essentially we cannot escape this. But we have to fight it, because that's the war. The war exists every single moment of every single day, 24/7. And you're not exempt on Shabbos. Why? Because I'm sorry, but it looks like I've been stuck in this body since I was born. Maybe you're different. Maybe you have out-of-body experiences. I don't know. Maybe you're super holy and you're not connected to the body. But, most of us lowlings down here, it's pretty hard to escape this thing. So that means that we are literally in the battlefront all the time. Another example of using the mouth, again, good or bad. See, the mouth is a very interesting organ because unlike the eyes, you see the eyes just kind of like let things in. And the ears, they just kind of like let things in. But the mouth can let things out and let things in. So we were talking about letting things out, like words coming out. But we eat and drink through the mouth. So the mouth is very, very interesting. And there we have the sensation of taste. So we have a choice. We can either learn to eat and learn to drink with kedusha. And there's plenty of halachas that describe how we're supposed to learn to eat properly with derech eretz and with making brachas with kavana, on and on and on. Sitting at a table, not rushing, chewing your food well, goes on. And of course, eating only kosher food of the highest hechsher possible, etc., etc. Or we don't want to, chas v'shalom, we would follow after our lusts. Meaning, not just like, I want to eat a cheeseburger. No, I'm not talking about that. That's obvious. That's like stam. I don't think we even think about doing such a thing these days. But we might think about, grabbing an apple and taking a bite and walking around. Like I'm out here in the woods, nobody around, as far as I know. Hopefully nobody's listening to me out here. It's pretty quiet. I can hear the birds chirping in the distance here and there, and they're flying around. But I could. I'm just gonna take my apple and walk around and eat my apple as I walk around. But you see, Chazal says you're not supposed to do that. He says that's the way animals eat. And a couple of days ago, in the same area, there was like flocks of sheep that come by from some of the Arab shepherds in the area, and you watch how a sheep eats. He doesn't spread out his little banquet and just put his plate down there, sit at the table and just sit there till he's done. No, he eats a little bit here, and he walks away, he eats a bit over there, and he walks over there, and he eats a bit over there. And Chazal is telling us we're not animals. We're not supposed to eat like that. So it's things like that. You sit at a table, put your food out, put your whatever. I'm not going to getting into halakhic discussions here. But I think you get the point. The point is that we can choose to use even what goes into our mouth also for good or for bad. And if we use to do it for good, then we're strengthening the good in the whole world, not just in ourselves. We're literally strengthening the kedusha and the holiness in all the worlds. In all the worlds, throughout, and even just throughout this whole world. Sometimes it's hard for us to see that, especially if we're like all by myself. You say, well, I'm just doing this, who's going to see? But we already learned about that. That's a ridiculous excuse. Who's going to see? Because Hashem sees, and Hashem's kavod fills the whole world. So it's kind of ridiculous to say who sees. So that means that therefore everything I do can have an impact well beyond where I can see it's having an impact. In things like how I eat, yes. And things like how I speak, yes. And whether I allow myself to listen to Lashon Hara or not, yes. Whether I allow myself to speak Lashon Hara, yes. Every little thing that we choose to do is an action of choosing good versus bad. There's very, very little things. Maybe if I'm walking down here in a pathway and I want to choose to go left or choose to right, okay, that's kind of a mundane choice. That's not really what we're talking about. But most of the real meaningful choices in life, and sometimes they go right over our head because we don't even think about them. That's where Bechirah is. That's where free will is. That's where the real battle is. Wherever there's a battle, that's where your Bechirah is. That's where your free will is. And no matter where you are, if you're at a low level or at a high level, it makes no difference, because wherever you are, there is an equal and corresponding, side of Tuma for the side of Kedusha, all the way up, until you get to such a high point in the highest worlds, where the force of Tuma no longer can suck on and leech on and suck out all the energy, all the holy energy. But we're not at that level. So that means that wherever we're going to go, even though you can look at it, wow, he's such a holy person. He's got, even in a sense, a stronger yetzer hara, because he's going up in Kedusha. That means that, therefore, the forces of Tuma that are equal to that are also stronger. See, people don't understand this. They say, oh, that person, that's such a holy person. How can he do such a terrible thing? Well, that's why. Because as he goes up and up and up, so does the temptations get stronger, and it becomes even much more difficult. And it's also another topic. Again, we're just looking at chapter headings here. So we talked a little bit about the eyes. Let me go say something more about the eyes. Another aspect of the eyes, because we just said a minute ago that the eyes are something that only takes in, and the ears are something that only takes in, but the mouth can take in and out. But really, the eyes also let out. What am I talking about? Well, it looks to me, I'm just the photons of light, and then there's the sun over there, right behind the camera, right? So there's all kinds of photons of light shining out all around me, bombarding my eye and going in my eye, and allowing me, right, to see these physical objects here in this physical world that I'm standing in. It looks like it's just stuff coming in. So what do I mean that stuff goes out? Well, it's a spiritual idea, but it's very real. And it's not just a spiritual idea in the sense that it doesn't have any effect. It literally does have effect. It's called, for example, Ein Hara, the evil eye. Right? If I look at somebody with a certain attitude and I'm jealous of that person, even for a split moment, I look at that, or maybe I look at somebody and I'm cheap. I see them that they need tzedakah or they need help. And maybe I'm not just cheap with my money, maybe I'm cheap with my time. Lots of ways to be cheap. And stingy. That's also an aspect of having a narrow, constricted evil eye, right? And an Ein Ra. Many different ways. And that's literally a force coming out of our eyes that can, again, damage not just what we're looking at, meaning a person, chas v'shalom. That's why when you see people walking around and they have to say something about, how they're so much blessed or they have many children, they'll oftentimes say, Bli Ein Hara. I'm saying this, but I want to be protected against any potential Ein Hara that's coming my way, like he put up a shield. It's understandable. So our eyes also can let out. And the same thing with our mouth. The words can come out there like arrows that shoot and hurt people. And the same thing, obviously, with ears as well, because when we hear, we allow ourselves to hear, and even worse, to believe Lashon Hara, we're also damaging people. There's also a force of tumah coming out of our ears that's actually literally harming the person that those words are about. So it's not just that they're just organs that take in. They're also organs that release out. There's a give and there's a take in all of it. And of course, we haven't mentioned, though, but the sense of touch. Obviously, you can touch things that you are allowed to touch. Like I can take an apple and I can hold it in my hand and make a bracha. I'm supposed to hold that apple when I make the bracha. Or I can touch chas v'shalom things I'm not supposed to touch. Right? We understand what I'm saying. So once again, we have embedded in our literal body the actual yetzer hara. It's embedded in our senses. That's where it is in all of the five senses, in every aspect of our five senses. And that's what it means to be swallowed up by the snake. That's what it means to be clothed in or with an iron, to be clothed with skin, to be clothed with flesh and blood. That's what it literally means. That's the mishka dechivya. That's the serpent's skin. And Hashem gave it to us because he says, now you're going to have to deal with it. You chose to take the advice of the snake. Now you're going to have to be put in a situation where you're going to have to choose that over and over and over and over again until you learn to finally reject it completely. When you create such a mess that you're finally willing to fight the war and be victorious. Because you think about it, we talk to people. We know, everybody knows the world is a mess. And we also know that a lot of people have fallen to very, very low levels. That's where we've fallen. But that's not a bad thing. That's a very good thing, because when we fall down to that level, we finally wake up. We're a generation of very, very fallen souls, but they're they're the souls that were the only ones that could go down that level and come back up. So in a sense, we're very high, lofty souls. And in that, we should take great comfort, even though you may find yourself right now, chas v'shalom, in a terribly low place. You don't stay there. You know that you're not going to stay there. You know that you're going to come back up, because that's who you are, because you are a living, breathing, infinite light of Hashem that just got stuck into a prison called your physical body. And so even though you've gone down to low levels, which we all have, that's where we're going to come up. We're going to come up because what does Rebbe Nachman say? He says, there's no such thing as despair. There is no such thing. It's an illusion, because even down there in the lowest depths that we sunk and that we allow ourselves to fall into, there is Hashem. He's there, waiting for us to just simply say, hi, help me out. And trust me, he'll help you out. And you'll come back up. And when you come back up, you're going to carry with you all of the rest of the world with you. That's why you went down there. You went down there so that you would connect with all that tumah. And when you come up, you're going to pull out of that tumah all of the holy sparks that got sunk in there from before the creation of the world. The time when the kalim were broken. And you're going to gather up all those sparks, and you're going to bring them back and restore them to the side of Kedusha and release them from their imprisonment. That's why you went down there. So you went down there for a good reason. Don't stay down there, obviously. If you stay down there, there's a big problem. But if you turn that around and you do tshuva and you come back up, then that sin that allowed you to fall down becomes a merit. Why did it become a merit? It became a merit because you did tshuva. And so now it's just a process. The going down was just a process for the coming up. Right? It's spoken of many, many times, so Likutei Moharan, that the Yeridah is simply the preview for the aliyah and vice versa. And so that's how the sins are turning into merits, because then, even though it's a Yeridah, it's going down, it's a sin, yes, it is. But once you do tshuva and come back up, now it's not a sin in of itself. It's just the first step in having an aliyah. So it's part of the mitzvah of ascending. And that's how it's changed. That's how we turn things around. Well, obviously you have to do tshuva out of love for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that's what happens. People that go down to those levels and start to come back up again, they do tshuva because they really want to, because they're aching to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. They want the vekus. And so I started to do some of these classes. There's now the second one out here in the woods, because I think it's an important, not just a prop, but it's part of what I'm trying also to help us with. That it's quiet out here. You can think, you can speak to Hashem. There's no noises. There's a rooster over there. There's a rooster pet, and sometimes I can hear him go cock-a-doodle-doo. He doesn't realize that the sun already rose a long time ago. But that's the rooster. They don't always have it quite all put together. All right, so I think I covered all of the basic senses. I went through the eyes, went through the ears. Smell. What about smell? Smell is a very peculiar sense. Now, our nose, again, functions in two different ways. One is it's used mostly for breathing. And some people have clogged up noses and they got to breathe through their mouth. But for the most part, if we're healthy, we breathe through our nose, our nostrils. Right? In and out. In and out. That's great. That keeps this body, physical body, alive. Gets the oxygen into the lungs so it can be disseminated into the blood and distributed into the blood and go around, provide oxygen for all the limbs of the body. Very nice. But inside there's also the sense of smell, which is very, very, like, super close to the brain, like really super close to the brain, like to the brain proper. So once again, we can say, well, the sense of smell is just something that goes in. You smell a flower or whatever. But also you breathe in and out, in and out, in and out. It's not just going in, it's also coming out. So what is this all about, this sense of smell or breathing? They're somewhat related, but quickly, I don't want to get into too many deep things here. I didn't bring out some notes, or just talking, just to share some thoughts in the early morning with you. So what is the Hebrew word for smell? It's re'ach, right? An aroma, a re'ach. So that's related to the word ruach. Now, what's the what? That's nice, Hoshea. What's your point? I'll get there. So we know that the lowest of the 5 levels of the soul is the nefesh. We all have that. Right? We have within this physical body, just like your body goes into a shoe, so too does the 5 levels of the soul come down and insert into this goof. Well, just like the only part of my body goes into the shoe, which is my foot, so too for the most of us, the only part of the soul that goes into this body is the lowest part of this big soul, called the nefesh, which is the lowest part. And that really corresponds to this world here, this physical world of asiyah. But the level above that, right, is called what? It's called the ruach, right? And that's the level of the soul. Now, most of us are not particularly zocha. We don't really merit in this world, and we may have to go through a whole bunch of gilgulim until we finally actually have that ruach, slipping into the shoe, as it were, slipping into this goof. What does that mean? It means that, otherwise, the ruach, the level above the nefesh, is kind of like, it's not quite in this thing yet. So the ruach, which corresponds to re'ach, smell, which is this very ethereal sense we have, is really so much more detached. It's much more difficult to understand and to really grasp, because it corresponds to a level of the soul that's really, for most of us, above our level of consciousness. So that's what we mean when we say that, for example, a certain level of the soul doesn't, quote, enter the goof, or doesn't go into the shoe. What are we talking about? What we mean is that our level of consciousness is not there. We all have, think of it like a sliding scale. Like you have, say, the lowest level of the soul, which is nefesh, and then you have ruach, and then you have the neshama, which is the 3rd level up, and then you have the other 2 higher ones, the chaya and the yeridah. And so then that's on one side. And then you have this thing called your consciousness, which is a sliding scale. So some people's consciousness are way down here in the bottom, right the nefesh of nefesh, or the bottom of all the bottoms. Chas v'shalom, that's true though, but that's where it is. So as we learn to refine ourselves with the Torah and so on, we begin to raise our consciousness up the scale. And if we were able to ever to be zocha to having our consciousness raised all the way up to the very top of this aspect called the nefesh, let's say we go right up to the very top of nefesh, then we would then enter into the very bottom of ruach, right? Then that part of the ruach is, what does that mean? But that the consciousness went up to that level, means that soul aspect has come down into this goof. It's now connected to the physical mind. It's part of our consciousness. We're aware of it. I cannot talk to you about it because I've never experienced it. But I know that it's true, so I look forward to it, because I think it'd be an awesome experience. And there are tzaddikim that literally not only have achieved that the ruach is also part of their goof, and part of, therefore, the conscious connected to that level of the soul, but even higher, even the neshama, and even higher than that, there are some tremendous tzaddikim which literally have refined themselves to such an extent it's literally impossible for us even being to comprehend where they're at. And that's the reality. So that's why the sense of smell is very difficult for us to grasp, but it connects to the higher level of the soul. But let's go back to something more mundane, which is the aspect of breathing in and out. Breathing in and out is also an aspect which we can do for good or for bad. But it's a spiritual idea. What do I mean? So we can breathe in the good spirit. Think about it. That's what it is. We're breathing in spirit. We're breathing in ruach, and we're letting out ruach. So we can breathe in a good spirit. We can be in a good environment and listen to and be a part of a good, holy environment. We're literally breathing in air, as it were, on a spiritual level that's more refined and more holy. Like Chazal said, that the air of Eretz Yisrael, right, helps you to become wise, because there's a certain refinement in the air here. It's not physical. You're not going to somebody's going to do a little injection, or take a syringe out and suck some of the air out and go into the lab and measure it, and it looks the same as the air back there in New York. Well, maybe a lot is polluted, but that's not the point. The point is that it's a spiritual thing, and when you breathe in that air, you're breathing in a certain aspect of kedusha, and then you're able to breathe it. When you breathe out, you're contributing to that, hopefully in a good way. On the other hand, chas v'shalom, you would breathe in tuma air. What do I mean? Well, let's say you go to a mall. Walking in a mall, and you're hearing all the awful music, and you're seeing all the awful sights. Oh, you're doing your best to be, guarding your eyes and all that stuff. Yeah, of course, because you're a holy Jew. I understand that. But you're breathing in all this tuma. That's the breathing in and out, and it's very difficult situation. So that's why we have to be careful where we go and who we associate with, and on and on and on. And it never ends. We're just giving ourselves a little idea. Okay, so that should sort of wrap it up, I think, for this class. This is in light of the fact we didn't have a Zoom class last night. But now you have hopefully a better understanding of what we mean by the yetzer hara versus the yetzer tov. It's literally embedded in our senses, and we can choose to use them for bad, chas v'shalom, rather instead to use them for good. And that's how we're going to refine ourselves and be zocha to regaining what was lost in the Gan Eden. Okay, until next time, have yourselves a great day.